You're listening to the Apple Insider Podcast.
Welcome to a very special episode of the Apple Insider Podcast. I'm Victor, and joining me is Daniel Aaron Dilger.
Hi, Victor.
Hey, I am so glad you're here. So, something big happened today. Why don't you tell me what it was?
Apple had a launch event where they didn't launch any hardware. I don't think I've ever seen anything like that before. As everyone knows, they launched all their hardware last week, the new updates to iPads and iMacs and the new AirPods, to get it all out of the way because they wanted to focus on content today.
Well, they did launch one physical product today.
The credit card.
The titanium laser-etched credit card. I think it's the thinnest product Apple has ever announced.
Probably.
I'm sorry, I had to make a joke about it.
Metal, yeah. Certainly electronic, yes.
I mean, it's bare metal.
Well, it is actually a computer. You know, the contact card.
Yeah, it's got a chip.
That's a computer. When you plug it into a contact reader, it powers it up and creates a number or something.
Yeah.
So yeah, they did do that. That was new hardware.
We got there. It was a hardware event. So what else did they do?
Well, it's interesting speaking of the card in particular, it's interesting that they did launch a card, even though their focus is on Apple Pay and touchless transactions, because there's a lot of places still that you can't use NFC payment from your watch or your phone. So the backup card serves two purposes. One, it allows you to use the same account everywhere, so you can be consistently using it. And secondly, it's kind of a prestige thing. There's a lot of prestige related to gold cards or platinum cards. When you pull it out, the black card, it means you're fancy. And so Apple's really tapping into that with, here's an account that you carry around, optionally, to use it when you need to. But they're incentivizing that you use contactless Apple Pay from your watch or whatever, because they're giving you more money back that way. This rebate is they're basically subsidizing the cost, or they're paying you back because they're charging the merchant. Credit cards, when you use a credit card, it's free to you, but they're charging the merchant. And
right. Merchant fees.
Some cards, the merchant fees, yeah. So the bank is charging whoever you're buying stuff from. That's why some places don't like to take cards.
Wasn't that the big thing that Walmart was upset about when they launched the MCX Pay thing that they're doing with Walmart Pay? Yeah,
anywhere
currency.
Stores like to do a couple of things. One is they don't like to take credit cards if they don't have to, but most do because there's so many people willing to pay for credit cards that they're going to miss out on some sales if they don't allow credit cards. So a big place like Walmart is going to take your credit card, but some stores won't take specific cards. Like if you have an Amex, they might not take it everywhere because Amex typically charges more, I think. So some places, if I try to use my Amex, they're like, oh, sorry, we don't take that. But this is based on MasterCard's network. So it should be broadly usable. But Apple is incentivizing that you use Apple Pay electronically because then they'll give you back more money. They'll give you 2% back as opposed to 1% back if you use the card. And then if you're buying Apple stuff, they give you 3% back.
And Apple stuff could be anything from a product in the physical store or the online store to the App Store or iTunes.
Yeah, and it's really interesting. I mean, this idea of instant money back is kind of a plus take on the idea of, I think the Discover card was the first time I remember doing it, the card that pays you back. That was like the whole motto. But there's also another thing that occurred to me with how they're approaching this. And the fact that they made this partnership with Goldman Sachs, who they noted was not in the consumer business of banking. So they don't have products of their own. It'd be kind of difficult for Apple to partner with a company that was already selling people stuff because they would have less incentive to give Apple more control over the whole experience. And Apple is really good at experience, but it's hard you can create a great experience on something, and it's hard to enter into a market where there's other companies that are competing against you. If you have a partner that will help you to get into a new market. And there's a couple of things that I thought of as examples of that. And one is when they launched the Macintosh, they worked with Microsoft to get software on it. They built their Office suite. And more recently and more dramatically, they partnered with AT&T, at the time it was called Singular, to launch the iPhone. And they gave AT&T exclusive access to, the allure of buying an iPhone meant that you had to get AT&T, which wasn't the best service at the time, certainly. But this fledgling network in the United States was willing to concede giving Apple a lot of leeway in controlling the experience. And that's what launched the iPhone experience. If they'd had to partner with Verizon and all these companies that didn't really want to work with them, they would have had a much harder time delivering a really different experience. And the iPhone was really different than any other cell phone because, you had one company controlling the App Store. It wasn't the cellular company that was trying to sell you ringtones and garbage apps that were junk based on Java or whatever. So in this case, partnering with a new bank allows Apple to create an experience with credit cards that are different. And one of the things that they stressed, a couple of things they stressed is showing you how to pay less in interest by paying off more instead of kind of saying, hey, here's your minimum payment you can make and you'll be in debt forever. And on the flip side, somebody noted, I didn't verify this myself, but somebody noted that the APR on the new card is rather high. It's like 13 to 25% or something.
Ooh, interesting.
But by teaching people to pay it off, you shouldn't really have a credit card debt. You should be paying off your credit card debt. Credit card debt is one of the worst things you can have.
You say that, but I think there are a large number of Americans that carry credit card debt.
Yeah, and that's really bad.
Yeah, I agree, and I think Apple would agree too, which is why they're hoping that they'll be able to use these kinds of things to establish good habits.
Yeah, so they're really teaching people, buy stuff using this card, but then pay it off. That's ideally things or the other novel thing was pay it off more frequently. So if you're making the biggest payment you can afford every 2 weeks, like every time you get paid, say, you're going to be saving a lot in interest as opposed to waiting an entire month to pay again. Interest is a real big trap. I learned that early in life, and fortunately it was bad enough to where I didn't have cards that charged me interest for the rest of my life. I've avoided that. So
yeah.
And then also the reporting and things like that and making it more friendly as a credit card. That was all kind of interesting.
Right. There were things like Mint early on years ago that allowed you to input your transactions and then be able to categorize them, or they would try and categorize them for you and try and help you see where your money was going and sort of guide you to a monthly budget. And I think Mint sort of fell by the wayside because, well, people still use it, but it's just become clunky and sort of forgotten over time, and I think hasn't gotten the attention it needs from its developers to make it really good.
And also the point of Mint wasn't to really make a great experience, it was to get your data.
Yeah.
They're trying to get you to line up all your accounts so that they could harvest just tons of information about what you're doing.
Right, and that's one of the things that Cook said about privacy today, was that Goldman Sachs is not going to sell your data, right?
Yeah, and that Apple is not even going to know what you're doing. So it's kind of the same thing with Apple Pay. They did that earlier with saying we're not keeping track of all your transactions and mining it for data. We show you your last transaction, but we're not even recording it for you. So that's kind of an interesting take as well of Apple's privacy stance.
Now, there are people who have been saying that there are other cards that have better rewards programs than this one. And
that was one of the things that they launched with Apple Pay is they said you can keep the card you have because you might like it.
Right.
As to remember, Google, when they launched Google Pay, the original one, I can't remember what the original one was called. I think
the original one was Google Pay, and then it became Android Pay.
And it was based on a virtual card. So it's more like what Apple's doing now. It was based on a card with a partnership with a bank that Google had.
Yeah, I have one of those cards, actually.
So that was a tough sell for Google because it made everybody have to get rid of the card you had to use it. You had to get a new card from Google to use it.
Well, actually, when I signed up for that at Google I/O one year, it was like 2012. You didn't have to sign up for a new card at that time. It was when they were just launching the NFC product. And so what they did was you put in your own card, and then you fed stuff into your sort of Google Wallet, and then you could use the physical card that they issued you as a way of withdrawing that at ATMs and stuff.
Okay.
So you weren't actually signing up a new agreement in the process. It was very similar to what Apple's doing now, actually.
I guess I'm thinking of the 2.0, when they started to launch the NFC product. But
well, this was the first NFC product, but they were pushing NFC really hard that year. They had a Samsung Galaxy something or other that they issued to people that attended I/O just so that they could show off how NFC payments would work. It was pretty wild. But that's not as important as what Apple's doing today. One of the questions that people were asking me earlier today was, will it be possible to use the other cards that you already have in Apple Pay with these new wallet features so that you can see where your spending is and categorize, since the categorization happens on the phone?
I didn't get that impression, perhaps. I'm not sure. But like when I use Apple Pay, it doesn't record everything that I'm doing. It gives you the last transaction that you made with Apple Pay. So like I said, I'm using various credit cards that I frequently use the card itself. So there'd be no way for Wallet to even know what half of my transactions were. So even if they could do that, it wouldn't be a complete picture.
Yeah, I understand. Cool. But it's an interesting kind of thing. I've thought for a long time that Apple Pay was one of the most interesting parts of something Apple could do, that it had a lot of potential.
And another thing that they released with the card, I've thought about, not specifically related to cards or banking, but Apple has a couple different, commenting systems and things like that in Apple support, where they can incentivize people by giving them micropayments. And that's what they're doing on the card, is when you buy from certain retailers like Apple itself, or if you use NFC Apple Pay, you're getting this cash back, and it goes to your Apple Cash card. So Apple's experimenting with paying people to incentivize them to do things, and then seeing an immediate reward. So here's some cash that you can use to split a tab or
buy more stuff.
Your balance early. So that's interesting.
Yeah, buy enough apps and it pays for another app. Do you know if the rewards can be if when we say purchasing stuff from Apple, if I purchase something like the TV Plus subscription, does that count towards the rewards? Like, would I get 3% back for buying a subscription from them?
I would imagine that if you are buying anything with your card, that's how it would work. But I don't know for sure. Okay, it's a transaction in iTunes. If you buy something in iTunes today on a card that has incentives, it will give you whatever because you're paying money. I mean, it's just another merchant.
Yeah. So after we talk about the card, right? The other thing that they announced, one of the other things they announced, was the idea of a News Plus service.
Yes, and we had a couple ideas if this was coming. One was, why were they doing news itself? And the other was their acquisition of Texture, which is an all-you-can-eat magazine subscription created by the magazines themselves. It was the big publishers were saying, how can we get people to do something that's going to work for us? So it was Hearst and Condé Nast and these companies created this product that Apple bought. And so they're already in on this. Magazines are almost like a lost art. But it was interesting that Apple was really, I think about my childhood and the magazines that had an impact on me. I mean, I was reading Science and National Geographic and things like that. And the combination of reading a lot of information with graphics and, the super professional photographer showcase that doesn't really exist anywhere else. And Apple's tapping into that to create something that's also a huge driver for iPad, because iPad was kind of this ideal way to browse information that's not just a static piece of paper. It can have dynamic stuff and type, photography and things like that, animation, video. And so what they're really creating is one of these epiphanies that I had when they were doing it is this is the convergence between PCs and television that nobody quite got right. Everybody thought it was going to be this box that allows you to browse the web while you're watching television or something. And I was like, no, here's something that works on the devices you have that gives you something you can read, which is something that television is not very good at. You can't really read text on television. So television is very much just a looking at pictures thing. And it puts that video, picture, live photo thing into the context of magazine. So you're kind of delivering this future of interactive, very graphical, video-based, almost like television, with the actual reading a lot of content that's in-depth journalism. So it's really creating a convergence between these two things in the past, newspapers and television and the web, and delivering it in a way that makes sense and that feels like a real product.
Yeah, and it
reminds us of magazines.
Completely integrated. And when they were showing on the screen the Essence magazine and the table of contents for their beauty issue, the cover was animated. The cover was a movie. The cover was a motion graphic. The articles were motion graphics. Everything was alive. Everything was touchable. Everything was not just a static, well, we could have printed this on paper too. There's something different about what's going on here.
And they've been working on that for a while. We've seen that happening, kind of evolving with Apple News. And then before that, they tried to work on creating Newsstand, and that didn't work because it was kind of because the publishers were too much in control, and they were trying to take what they already had and take,
shove a
Flash
PDF
content,
onto it, right?
Yeah, shove it into a PDF or something, or in some way just take what they had, which makes sense for the publisher, but it makes for an experience for the user that's not very good. And it was all sort of based on a whole bunch of different apps. So you had to buy and subscribe to all these different apps separately or whatever. But so yeah, they're taking this big picture, solve a whole thing, and create a new way of working on things for journalism and apps, or news-related apps like papers and things. So that was exciting to see.
And they've got some big deals with subscription content. Right? They had, they showed this, the Skim, the Highlight by Vox, Vulture, TechCrunch, The Cut, Grub Street. And they also mentioned the Wall Street Journal.
And the LA Times, right?
LA Times. And in Canada, The Star. So and my understanding was that for the content like the LA Times and the Journal, It's not just some section of online content only. It's everything they have.
I'm actually not sure about that. I think they were described it as a curated experience. So I think it's not going to be. I don't think they're trying to replace people who are subscribers of the entire Wall Street Journal, everything, like business subscribers.
Neil Seibert posted on Twitter saying, by the way, all paid WSJ content will be available in Apple News Plus. Any reporting that suggests otherwise is incorrect.
He would know.
that it's.
I saw a different tweet from somebody else, but I'm sure Neil knows what he's talking about.
Yeah. Now, clearly, you can't use the WSJ website to get into it also. It probably has to be only through the news app, because otherwise the WSJ would have to know about you as a customer.
Right.
And it's my understanding, you tell me I'm right or wrong, that WSJ has no insight into whether or not you're a customer because your subscription is through Apple News Plus.
Yes. The other thing, I would imagine that publishers would be getting paid based on what you're reading, but Apple made it pretty clear that they're not going to be tracking what you're reading, so maybe they're just getting a fixed cut. I'm not sure how that works, but how they're going to model how much each publisher is going to get of the money that you're paying for unlimited use of all these magazines. But the only downside I see here is, the only kind of critical thing I can throw in is these are all massive publications that are global or national or whatever. So the newspapers that serve your small town or smaller cities, things like that, it's going to be harder for them to benefit from a system like this. However, realistically, the newspaper is almost dead. Small media in towns and smaller cities is having a really hard time surviving, and that's why newspapers and journalism is dying, and why we're getting our news from Facebook and sources of free garbage that are just shoveling us, completely made up garbage.
Yeah.
These little videos of nonsense. So I'm overall very happy that Apple's creating a marketplace for real journalism and people who actually can write and take pictures of amazing things. And creating a marketplace is the most important thing for them, because there's no way that free and ads are going to pay for this stuff, because we've already done the web and we know what the web generates. The web goes for lowest common denominator garbage.
You get listicles. You get the top 13 things that you need to know about. Yeah.
Yeah. When you monetize with ads and how many clicks something gets, you get garbage.
The top 13 reasons that journalism is dying. Yeah,
exactly.
So how is it possible for local papers to be able to get into Apple News Plus? Do they have an avenue to distribute?
Thing. How would you do that? How would you create something like that? So maybe in the future. There's a lot of ways to work on things, but
okay. I only posit about this because I have a close family relative who runs a small town newspaper, runs two of them, in fact. And so I was thinking, what can I tell her about this to see how she can use it to her advantage? But
and another thing to think about, that's kind of parallel to this, is radio stations. It's the same thing. We saw radio stations dying in the 80s, but most radio stations, if you have a local radio station in your town, were a long time ago transitioned into Clear Channel, whatever stations,
right,
where you may have somebody local that's giving station identification, but all the content is coming from Texas or somewhere else.
That happened to a lot of them.
Kind of cookie cutter.
There are still some independents, though. There are still some independent stations out there.
Yeah, but not very much. That's kind of a thing that's sort of dead. And
it depends a little bit on genre, right? You get a lot of Christian music stations that play church broadcasts on Sunday. Those are local. The classical musical station next to me, WCPE, is a local station, not owned by anyone other than themselves.
Maybe some indie stuff. There's something to support that.
They're out there, but it's obviously a lot less once Clear Channel began gobbling everything up.
And you can blame Clear Channel, but it's also this. We saw the same thing with like local entertainers that would do stage shows, and before the advent of television, and before that it was movie theaters that kind of took talent and sort of homogenized it for an audience of millions, as opposed to a few hundred people that are in an arena in a specific city. And so this is just kind of the way things work when we have global economics.
Yeah.
But hopefully things will continue to get better, at least for the big newspapers.
It's $10 a month. Apple News Plus gets you magazines, gets you machine learning recommendations, gets you curated news, gets you all kinds of incredible content, including the National Geographic stuff you were just mentioning earlier. It seems like a really good value.
Yes, and I think it's creating a lot of new revenue for those sources. If people are buying, $10 a month is pretty reasonable if you read for stuff. But that's $120 of revenue that those magazines are probably not going to get otherwise. So it's a lot like Apple Music. I mean, are people going to pay for new music in iTunes as downloads? And downloads are kind of dying, but Apple Music is a way to get everyone to pay a little bit, and so artists are at least getting money.
Okay. Now, after they did News Plus, they announced a thing called Apple Arcade.
Yes, we anticipated this also. It makes sense. I think.
What is Apple it? First of all,
so it's games that Apple is really incentivizing games that are going to be good. They've already created a huge platform. Tim Cook called it, it's like the biggest video game platform. If you compare it to things like, PlayStation and any other mobile, definitely mobile stuff. But Apple's created the only business model for creating mobile video games. Even for Android, it's not very good because there's no way to really sell content. You just have to put ads on it, which don't give you very much money.
Fortnite on Android, they told you to sideload it rather than going through Google Play, for that matter.
Yeah. So Apple has created this actual platform, but there's only a few games on. I mean, that's probably unfair to say, but there are a lot of games that aren't very good because they're this kind of casino model of generating in-app revenue or in-app purchases. So the whole point of the game is just to kind of string you along and to get you to buy little bags of gold or something to continue playing the game.
Keep buying more cookies and stuff. Yeah.
Because A, that's a really clever way to get money out of people, but B, it's also hard to sell people on a new game every few minutes, or as new games come out. And so here with Apple Arcade, Apple's creating. First of all, they're incentivizing developers to put more money into developing better quality games that are paid for by subscription as opposed to paid for by in-app purchase or something like that, or advertising, or data, stealing, surveillance, advertising. And at the same time, they're also the fact that they're creating good content means that people are going to have another reason to buy an iOS device and maybe a newer iOS device, like a newer phone that's going to actually deliver games that look and sound amazing, or that play, incredible on an iPad Pro. The new iPad Pros, the sound on them and just the screen is so incredible. That's a really powerful way to play games.
I bet.
And so creating content for this hardware sells the hardware, and creating content also creates a reason to subscribe to this as a service, which creates the content developers, putting the talent into building these creative, interesting, beautiful games.
Yeah, and I understood that they were subsidizing the creation of these games, that they were supporting the developers to do this.
Yeah, just the fact that they're creating a market, it's generating revenue, and they're putting that money back into it. Even the App Store itself is a way to help developers make money. I don't know the terms of how they're going to be supporting development directly, but just the fact that they're creating a market that has real revenue in it is going to be amazing for gaming. Should
services like Steam be concerned at all? Should Valve be worried right now?
I don't know. There's different kinds of gaming experiences. And if you look at console games, people always hated it when I compared console games or even things like the PlayStation Portable with iPhones when it was first coming out. And they're saying, this is not even similar. And yes, it is not directly similar to compare a game that plays on a console with a mobile game. In the same way, that's not really always fair to compare a console game, PlayStation or Xbox, with a PC game, where you have even higher end hardware and you have a lot more complicated interaction with, you're typing on a keyboard, you have all kinds of buttons or whatever controllers. Those are all different kinds of experiences, and they have come at different sort of business models. Some of the games that you buy for PC or consoles are, $80 for a game. Mm-hmm. That you're buying a really high-end, AAA game. That's not going to probably ever exist on a mobile device, but Apple is creating a way to monetize stuff that's going to be amazing on mobile, and there's money for it. Because right now, the App Store, if most games are like a couple bucks, there's a limited amount of things you can do. Even with a huge audience, there's a limited amount of things you can do with a game that costs $2 that you have to maintain for, perpetually forever. Having recurring revenue allows you to do a lot of creative, interesting things and put a lot of work into them so that they're amazing. And it's customized for the mobile environment, so on mobile devices.
And I was really intrigued by the titles and the types of people that they have working on these games. They had, Gosh, they had one of the people behind Final Fantasy.
Yeah.
They had a game that had art direction done by Dave Gibbons, who was the fellow who illustrated The Watchmen, which was a movie a couple of years ago, but a comic book before it, and an award-winning comic book. They've got some serious people working on these games. It's artistry that we're really seeing there in the form of a game. So I'm really glad that there is a marketplace, that Apple is supporting this model of paid games that tell a deeper story, that are more engaging.
And one of the things that I don't think I saw I don't remember anyone predicting this, but there used to always be the message, Apple doesn't get gaming.
Yes.
Because, for a big time, Apple didn't get gaming. And they kind of fell into it with iPhone and iPod Touch. I mean, they really had games before that for iPod. It was kind of an experiment of how to do mobile games.
That was just about how to distribute on iTunes, basically.
Yeah, exactly. But here they're trying to do this little arcade kind of games on an iPod. And then with iOS, they kind of stumbled into this market where a lot of a majority of apps were games. And so they ended up with a market, and now they're taking that market that they've already developed and using it to produce content that's going to be the best content for mobile. I mean, obviously, because they have the money to do it. When you have money to do great art, that's kind of a shoo-in that you can get it done. If you don't have if you don't have a business model that supports the art, then you can either make terrible products, or you can ask for a lot of money per title. And a lot of the things are just not going to happen on mobile devices. Yeah,
it becomes very limiting to the few that can manage to do it without the budget. So that's pretty cool. There's a lot that I'm hopeful to try out there. The examples that they showed in the video that they showed in the keynote were really exciting to me. So I'm hopeful.
Yeah, there's some beautiful and interesting looking ideas there. And they're all different. It's not just like a cookie cutter, like, here's a fighting game, here's another fighting game, here's shooting zombies again. No,
it was these are games where there is no violence, where there is no shooting. Not all of them, but a couple of them were like that, right? There's a range.
And there's already a pretty good game. I mean, in the App Store, there's a pretty good selection of games that do a lot of interesting things. But
like Monument Valley 2, right? Monument Valley is one of these great games where they made the one, they said they weren't going to make a second. And then a year later, they came out with one, and both of them were beautiful. And they have these great mechanics, and they tell a story. And they're not the same sort of thing you'd find on a console necessarily, but they're incredible.
A lot of this evolution wasn't something that Apple invented. It was developers, they're creative. We're creating this stuff from the frameworks that Apple was developing. And so once they got it done, you look at WWDC and Apple's helping and supporting development. They're not telling developers you need to do this necessarily. They're saying here's the tools to do what you are good at, which is a really good partnership. And here's a kind of continuation of that evolution of once they've created a foundation that there's interesting stuff going on, now they can broaden it and make it available to other people and people who are talented in other areas, like you're mentioning with anything from comic books to a different style of gaming on a different platform.
Well, there was the fellow who's behind Final Fantasy. So that was more of an action kind of thing. There's the sim type game where they talked about you just following your characters around, living their everyday lives, right? There are all sorts of different ways that this can be explored. I am excited to see it. And I am off and on a gamer. I am sometimes a traditional gamer, and sometimes I go away from games for a while. I have a Steam set up, and I'll get into it for a while, and then I'll get away from it. I think this is giving me some optimism about, and I'm really hopeful about the kinds of things that can be created.
And it'll be interesting if they can use this to leverage the development of better games for Apple TV. Because Apple TV is actually pretty decent for hardware. I mean, it's nothing like a PlayStation,
Even the fourth gen is pretty good.
Yeah, it's pretty good for putting stuff on a television that's playable and fun and visually interesting. The problem is how many people are going to go to Apple Television and put down money on a regular basis for a new game, and it's kind of harder to manage titles and stuff. But if you have a system that works kind of like the TV app, where it's saying here's the games you have, and you can continue where you left off from over here. It will be a great thing for Apple TV and having more people looking at that as a product that is relevant in gaming.
Yeah.
Because right now there are some games that are kind of fun to play, but they're basically have that in-app purchase model that either makes the game super frustrating if you're not paying for it or very expensive.
Well, I've said for years that the App Store on Apple TV is terrible for discovery. That if you're trying to look for games and you want to find games that are multiplayer, that can use controllers, that can take advantage of the things that you can do with Apple TV, it is almost impossible to find them. It is really difficult and really frustrating. And then once you find them, you have no way of trying them out. You just have to drop your $10 or $15 on them, or $5 on them, or whatever the fee is, or the dollar, and pay in app. And it's not easy. It tends to be frustrating. So this kind of pay monthly and have access to everything could be a real win. If you think about how much you throw away on apps a month, trying to either play ones that have in-app purchases or trying to just try out and find good ones. And, I'll throw $1 at this one, throw $1 at that one. The next thing you know, you spent $7 to $10 during the month. This starts to make a lot of sense.
Optimistic?
I'm hopeful. I really am.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, we saw some great art in the show today. Those games, I want to play those. I do. Would I pay $10 to play all of the ones that they showed today? Yeah, probably, because I would have probably paid $4.99 for one of them. And if they have 100 of those that are that good or that interesting, or even if they have 50 of them that are that good or interesting, or even if they have 30 of them that are that good or that interesting, and the catalog grows to the point where I keep getting more that are good, I don't see a problem.
And having the money, I think I'm kind of surprised that Apple hasn't put more money into app development, either first party or, buying up successful stuff and really pushing it harder. This could be an opportunity to see Apple putting more money into ensuring that there's good content available so that people will have a reason to buy its hardware. And making it exclusive means that here's another reason to buy an iPhone as opposed to, a phone that's considerably cheaper and has similar, specifications on a checkbox review.
Yeah.
Here's something, here's another blue bubble kind of feature that adds exclusivity to the iPhone, gives iPads another reason to be very useful, and also gives Apple TV a reason to exist.
One of the nice things about subscriptions through Apple is that they're very easy to turn off and on again. If you're using Apple, Apple Arcade, and you find after a month or so that you don't use a whole lot of it, that it's not working out for you for whatever reason, it's very easy to unsubscribe and then come back later and resubscribe. And I have always appreciated that because it feels like I'm not being suckered into something the way it has with other subscription services that I've tried in the past. It's really liberating to be able to turn it on and off without a whole lot of worry. It makes it easier to keep it on, in fact, because there's not that sleaziness aspect to it.
Yeah.
Speaking of things where we were talking about just a second ago, you mentioned running on other devices that are nominally the same from a checkbox standpoint. We got to talk about the TV app, because the TV app is going to run on other devices.
Well, the content, yes. There's going to be...
They said they're bringing the TV app to Samsung, LG, Vizio, Sony, and Roku and Amazon Fire devices, Fire TV.
It'll be interesting to see how similar they are. Because, Netflix is on a lot of devices, and some of them are awful. Netflix is really good on some things, and then other devices, it's kind of like I have Netflix on a Samsung television that I just want to pull my eyes out when I have to deal with it.
Yeah.
It's much better on Apple TV and other devices.
And Netflix is interesting as an example because Netflix tries to use some devices as beta test of their users for app updates.
Yeah.
Like they'll use for years they used the Sony PlayStation as their beta device. And if you had one, used Netflix on it, you got whatever they wanted to send you as the interface that day.
Yeah.
And then once they decided what it would be, they propagated it out to everyone else. And today the interface for Netflix on Apple TV is the same as the interface for it on Amazon Fire TV, is the same for it as on Roku, because they want to try and get everything to be consistent as soon as they've decided what that's going to be.
Right.
And Hulu is similar, right? Hulu runs the same interface on all of them. And Amazon, when they were talking about Prime Video, someone did this sort of disassembly on Prime Video's app, and it looks like they're using the actual same literal code on every device, that the iOS app and the Apple TV app have code in it for other devices. It's really bizarre. So
I'm not an expert in devices, but there is a pretty significant difference in computing power across all these different devices and television stuff. But it'll be interesting to see.
The TVs that they're saying they're going to run this stuff on are the new 2019 models and some of the 2018 models. I'm not sure how far back they're going, so we presume that they're picking models that are going to have appropriate levels of hardware support for them.
Right. And it's getting to the point where it's not that big of a deal to run an app like this. I mean, it's not any modern computer should be able to do a pretty decent job of running something that's this kind of quality. I mean, it's not like it's a really complicated app, but
well, the machine learning recommendations that they're using are probably not happening on your Vizio TV. That's probably happening server side, maybe. I'm just guessing because I wouldn't expect that to run the machine learning stuff for TV app on a Vizio processor.
They're probably
maybe
scale.
I'm mistaken.
I mean, you could deliver the experience that you're delivering. You can deliver sort of a basic experience everywhere, and then have things better on Apple TV, which would be what you'd kind of expect Apple to do. But just having something that works and allows you to use your content everywhere, that's going to be a big deal. And when Apple first started talking about this, we read a couple of articles about Apple Music being on Alexa devices and AirPlay. No, what do they call it now?
So
AirPlay 2.
AirPlay 2 and HomeKit compatibility are going to be on some of these television sets, for example. And I don't think.
And then iTunes is kind of a separate thing. I'd imagine iTunes that they were talking about putting on Samsung televisions will now become this iTunes app, or I mean the TV app.
Yeah,
it's basically the next. It's the new iTunes app because you can get iTunes movies within this app now.
Yeah.
So imagine iTunes is now becoming Apple Music and Apple TV.
And
essentially,
they're shoehorning other services into this thing too, right? They've got the Spectrum cable and DirecTV from AT&T, and your Optimum cable kind of thing. And they've got HBO, Starz, Showtime, CBS All Access being sold through it, similar to sort of how Amazon does with the channels in their Prime Video stuff. And PS View is going to be a part of it, so that TV app really becomes the portal for all of your watching.
Yeah, so it's kind of an interesting take on basically changing the interface for Apple TV and similar television boxes like that from one that's exactly the same as an iPhone, an iOS,
right,
to a new kind of platform where everything isn't necessarily app-based. It's based on what you're wanting to look at, the kind of content that you're looking for, whether it's Showtime, specifically, you want to look at Showtime shows, or if it's action movies, or just in general things that you're interested in. Apple's creating an interface that's kind of based on interest as opposed to an app store with app titles. And the fact that they've given Apple TV its own operating system name with tvOS, it's kind of similar to watchOS, where you do have apps you can click on, but the functionality of the watch is more based on what you're doing, what you're interested in accomplishing, as opposed to this is an app that this has these features.
Very cool. Do we know how much this TV Plus service that goes along with the new TV app is going to cost?
I don't think they've said yet. I think there's speculation that it's going to be something like $5 to $50. I don't know. But they're talking about it in the fall. So I think it's going to be dependent on how many partners they line up. There's going to be some working out contracts.
Right.
They specifically mentioned Showtime and some of these other channels. And
Starz, Epix, HBO, CBS All Access, and there were some others. I had the list earlier.
So they're working it together. But I mean,
there we go.
The price. I mean, the price is important, but the price is not the hardest thing for Apple to figure out.
One of the things I was sort of hoping, and I didn't hear anything about it, but I'm still kind of interested in the idea of it, is a sort of the way that Amazon sort of has in the past given you access to all of their stuff for the one price of having Prime. Them bundling this with music or this with some of the other services, so that it becomes just one thing you pay. I mean, there's something good about the a la carte, and they said, maybe you don't want to pay for everything all at once, but it's, I don't know. I go back and forth. What's your thoughts?
If they can define each of these things as being valuable enough, then it will make sense. People will be like, sure, I'll pay for arcade because I like games, and I'll pay for TV because I watch stuff, and various things like that. The reason Amazon bundles everything together into this Prime is because Amazon's business really isn't all these different things. It's selling stuff online. It's being a marketplace for everything. And the primary thing of Prime is that it's free shipping. And they're creating other services that give you some reason to have Prime. But the main benefit to Prime is you're going to pay a significant amount for it to get shipping because you're buying stuff on a regular basis. And that incentivizes you to go to Amazon to buy more stuff. Here, Apple's creating things that are very different and appeal to different audiences to some extent. I mean, some people are going to just subscribe to everything, and some people are going to be like, I want to read magazines, I don't play games, whatever. Yeah. I'm sure they could do, bundles where you put things together, but they don't do that for, Apple TV and iCloud and the subscriptions you can buy now. So I'm not sure that Apple needs to follow a Prime model because their business is so different than Amazon's.
Okay. Very cool. So after they talked about the TV app and the TV Plus service, they started talking about their own shows that they're producing. And we talked about and reported on that in the past a little bit. But can you go ahead and speak a little bit about that?
Well, they've put together a lot of talent. And, every time we talk about Apple TV or TV shows, everyone likes to say, oh, I don't know, they started out so badly with this
Planet of the Apps and Carpool Karaoke.
They're so terrible and kind of unwatchable. And it's like, yeah, but you have to learn how to produce stuff first. You have to learn the business model. And Apple was, they weren't trying to figure out how to do their own content so much as that they were trying to figure out, how does this model work? How can we scale up to create the money to be able to do something like this? And it was comparable in some ways to their history with iTunes. And originally it was music from as many labels as they could get to buy into it. And then they added video very slowly. It was like music videos and then some Disney shorts and Pixar things. And as they were proving that this model worked, then other studios could not be part of it. I mean, they wanted to be part of it. So here's a situation where they're saying, we can pay to develop stuff. We're creating a model. We have the subscribers that pay for stuff. So if you have a great idea and you have a team that can develop it, we can monetize it with the subscription that we are creating.
I want to thank Dan for joining us. You can find Dan at Daniel Aaron on Twitter. I'm at VMarks on Twitter. Go ahead and email us. I'm at victor@appleinsider.com, and we will be back later in the week with more information covering all about Apple. Thank you so much. We'll be back.